Hey guys, tonight we drift far from the modern world, all the way into the dry, sun-baked sands of ancient Nubia, where the mornings start early, the goats never mind their business, and, unfortunately for you, your molar feels like it's staging a tiny revolution inside your skull. You're a Nubian villager waking up with a throbbing toothache. And no, there's no Tylenol, no dentist, no numbing gel, just fermented beer and a prayer to the gods of barley. You probably won't survive this without a bit of mild drooling and public embarrassment. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up. Sort of. You're technically awake, but the left side of your face is refusing to cooperate. It feels swollen, hot, and it's definitely buzzing. Not the fun kind of buzzing, but the kind that says, something in here is not okay, and it's probably going to make your day worse. You push off your straw mat, blink toward the thatched ceiling, and try to remember if you accidentally chewed on a rock yesterday. You groan. The kind of groan that tells the rest of the house, today is not starting well. But your groan is answered by a different kind of sound. From outside your mud brick home, someone or something is snorting, loudly. You shuffle to the doorway, half blind with pain, and squint into the morning sun. And there she is, the goat, the same one who stared you down last week and tried to eat your sandal. She's got a smug little expression, if goats can have those, and she's chewing on what might be your laundry. You sigh, because you can't chase a goat with a toothache, not effectively, not with dignity. Instead, you shuffle back inside and look for your morning water jar, except someone's moved it, probably your cousin who borrowed it just for a minute yesterday, and then wandered off to flirt with the basket weavers. Son, again. You grab a smaller pot, rinse your mouth carefully, and instantly regret it. Cold water hits the sore tooth like a slap from an angry spirit. You drop the pot. It clatters. The goat snorts again, possibly in applause. You want to scream, but instead, you sit down and stare at your ceiling, holding your jaw like it might fall off without warning. You think, what did people do for toothaches before dentists? And then you remember. Beer. Not the kind you drink at royal festivals or weddings with elaborate chants and gold cups. No, the medicinal beer. The kind your grandmother makes in a clay vat buried half a meter underground. The kind that smells suspiciously like vinegar and old bread and tastes even worse. You've avoided it for years. It's not pleasant. It fizzes when it shouldn't. It once made your cousin see a talking snake that wasn't there. But right now, you'd drink fermented snake oil if it would make this pain stop. You stand, slowly, carefully, like every movement might jostle that one angry molar. Your neighbor greets you with a cheerful wave as you pass. You grunt. She smiles wider. You look well rested, she says, clearly lying. You try to smile back. Only one side of your face participates. A child runs past with a fig in one hand and something wet and squishy in the other. You don't ask. This is not your circus today. You follow the winding, dusty path past the grain hut, past the communal oven already smoking with morning bread, and toward the edge of the village, where the older homes sit quietly, their walls faded, their courtyards always filled with herbs drying in the sun. You arrive at your grandmother's compound. A soft breeze carries the scent of fenugreek, cloves, and old secrets. She's already awake, of course. She's always awake, sitting cross-legged near a fire pit, grinding something in a shallow stone bowl. She looks up and raises an eyebrow. Tooth, you mutter. She nods like she was expecting this exact moment. Left side, you nod. She pats the ground next to her. Sit. You do, with a grunt. Your joints are fine. It's your soul that feels inflamed. She hands you a root. Rough, woody, slightly fragrant, Chew this. You look at her like she's joking. She's not. You bite carefully. Immediately, the taste floods your mouth. Bitter, earthy, something between old carrots and regret. But more importantly, your mouth starts to feel a little number. Not better, but different, which is close enough. You ask what it is. She shrugs. I don't remember the name, but it works. Historians still argue whether ancient Nubians relied more on herbal remedies or fermented potions for pain. But one thing's for sure. Your grandmother believes in layered suffering. First the root, then the beer. Because as she stands and hobbles, toward the corner of her hut, she pulls back a reed mat to reveal an old clay pot covered in palm fibre and cloth. You've seen that pot before. It's alive. Not in the magical sense, but in the biological one. Whatever lives inside it has developed a personality and possibly sentience. She lifts the lid. A hiss escapes. The smell. Part vinegar, part bread, part something else you don't want to name. Hits you in the face. She hands you a cup. You drink. It's warm, sour, fizzy, a bit grainy. But after a few gulps, the pain fades just a little. The throbbing softens. The tightness in your jaw relaxes, just slightly. You look at her. She nods like she expected nothing less. Drink more later, she says. And then, just like that, she goes back to grinding something else. Like this is just another Tuesday. You sit in the shade. The sun climbs higher. The village hums with life. And you're holding a slightly cursed cup of ancient Nubian beer, wondering what other secrets it might hold. You sit there for a while, nestled into the warm dust beside your grandmother's cooking pit, the rim of the clay cup still pressed to your lips even though you've stopped drinking. The beer, if we can even still call it that, has left your tongue tingling, your jaw slightly numb, and your soul somewhere between mildly revived and emotionally defeated. You haven't moved much. The Nubian morning is already in full swing around you, and you're barely functioning. But no one seems to mind. Because here, in this dusty stretch of the Nile's southern bend, mornings are slow, sand gets everywhere, and people don't expect greatness from someone clutching their jaw like they're about to audition for a silent tragedy. You shift your weight and glance around your grandmother's home again. It's small, circular, built from sun-dried mud bricks, and topped with a thick thatch roof. The outer wall is coated in white ash paint to reflect the heat, and inside, hanging from pegs hammered into the wall, are bundles of dried herbs, strings of fish bones, you don't ask, and an old ceremonial rattle made from tortoise shell and seed pods. And then there's the goat again. You didn't hear her arrive. You never do. She's somehow gotten inside the courtyard again. She stares at you, chewing very slowly on one of your cousin's old sandals. You stare back, in pain, in mild awe, possibly in admiration. Your grandmother, without even looking, up, mutters, "Don't let her near the root pile again, she gets loud." You nod, as if you have authority over the goat. With a sigh, you push yourself to your feet. The clay cup in your hand is now sticky and faintly warm. The beer has settled into something syrupy. You don't want to think about it. Outside, the sun is climbing fast, already casting long shadows across the dusty walkways between homes. You squint toward the grain huts and see smoke curling up from one of the ovens. That means breakfast is almost ready. Your stomach grumbles. Unfortunately, your tooth has a strong opinion about chewing. Still, you decide to head over to the communal oven. Because if there's one thing worth risking your molar over, it's that morning bread. Dense, chewy, and sprinkled with just enough crushed coriander to make you believe in kindness again. You limp across the village square, waving off a neighbour who offers you a mango pit as a joke. At least you think it's a joke. And arrive at the oven just as the first loaf is pulled out. The baker, an auntie with arms like temple columns, hands you a piece without a word. She notices your face. She's seen that look before. Eat slow, she says. Don't be brave. Bravery gets you pain. You nod and break off a tiny piece. Just a nibble. And then it happens. Crunch. It's not the bread. It's something inside. The bread. You freeze. Your eyes water. Your soul momentarily leaves your body. The pain blooms like fire through the left side of your jaw. You feel betrayed. You're not even sure what you bit. A rock, a seed, the cursed soul of a hyena. You don't ask. You just drop the bread, sit on the ground and stare into the middle distance. Ah, the baker says, nodding. Must have been the coriander batch. You contemplate screaming, but instead, you just whimper. She hands you a soft fig in sympathy. You nod in thanks. You can't eat it, but it's the thought that counts. This, you think, is what survival looks like in Nubia. Chewing cautiously, trusting no loaf, and hoping fermented beer will save your soul. You hear a familiar snort. The goat is back. This time she's chewing on a strip of palm fibre, probably meant for basket weaving. She wanders over and headbutts you gently in the shin. You take it as support. With effort, you rise again and decide it's time for reinforcements. More beer? Probably. But also, maybe the healer. Because as much as your grandmother's root and hiss, method has offered some relief. This pain is stubborn. And the local healer has tools and rituals and possibly a grudge against your family, but you're willing to risk that now. You make your way toward the healer's hut. It's near the river, bend, shaded by a rare, gnarled sycamore that leans like it's eavesdropping on the world. The hut is marked with a painted cow skull, several dangling charms made of crocodile teeth, and, strangely, a chicken feather stuck into the lintel. You clear your throat outside the entrance. No response. You try again. Finally, a voice from inside. If it's about your cousin's rash, I'm not responsible. You wince. Tooth. There's a pause. Then, the angry kind. You nod. You step inside. It smells like smoke, honey, and something vaguely fishy. The healer is crouched over a stone bowl, grinding. Something. He looks up. Oof. That side of your face is trying to escape. You grunt. He gestures to a mat. Sit. Let me look. You do. He peers into your mouth, taps around the sore area with the back of a wooden stick. You yelp. Deep ache. Likely the worm. You blink. Worm? He nods gravely. Yes. A toothworm. It drills. It chews. It sings tiny songs of rage. You've heard it, yes? You're not sure if that was the beer, but maybe. Historians still argue whether ancient beliefs in toothworms stemmed from visible decay or from the simple need to blame something when your face started attacking you. Either way, toothworms were real to the people of Nubia, and apparently to this guy. He hands you a pouch of herbs. Chew this 3 times a day, spit out the foam, and avoid mango pits. You thank him. But before you leave, you ask, beer helps? He shrugs. Beer helps everything, unless it doesn't. Then you drink more. You limp back through the village, goat trailing behind like a judgmental spirit guide. You sit outside your grandmother's, hut once more, mix the herbs into a fresh cup of beer, and sip slowly. The pain doesn't vanish, but it quiets. And in ancient Nubia, that's as close as you'll get to a miracle. You wake up slouched against the wall of your grandmother's hut. A mostly empty clay cup of beer cradled in your hands, and a thin line of dry drool arcing dramatically down your chin, like some kind of ancient Nubian war paint. For a moment, the pain in your jaw is blessedly absent, until you remember you have a jaw, and that jaw remembers it has a grudge. You wince, then groan, then slowly, very slowly, you uncurl your legs and stand up like someone who's been personally cursed by the god of molars. The beer did something, but it didn't do everything. You feel like your mouth has been arguing with itself all night, and unfortunately, the tooth seems to have won. Your stomach rumbles. Loudly. This, somehow, feels worse than the toothache, because now you must attempt what may be the cruelest test of all. eating with a damaged jaw. Your grandmother, ever the early riser, is already crouched at her stove, flipping flatbreads over a hot clay griddle. She glances at you, takes one look at your swollen cheek, and doesn't say a word. Just hands you a wooden bowl filled with warm honey, roasted nuts, and a thin slice of bread already torn into bite-sized pieces. You bless her silently. But before you can sit, a distant crack echoes across the compound. You freeze. Another crack, louder this time, followed by a faint, disappointed goat noise. You already know what this is. It's him, your cousin, the one with too much energy, a slingshot obsession, and the unshakable belief that goats should fear him. He bursts around the corner with a victorious whoop, clutching what may or may not be a pebble covered in goat hair. Behind him, the goat charges. Again, you step out of the way, bowl in hand, watching as he scrambles up a grain bin and clings to the edge like a lizard mid-crisis. The goat gives you a long, knowing look as she trots past. She's definitely the village's true ruler. You nod your respect. Finally seated, you dip a bit of bread into the honey nut mash and chew, very, very cautiously. It's not terrible. In fact, it's the first thing that hasn't made your eye twitch in hours. You're halfway through your modest breakfast when a neighbour wanders by with a basket of dates and curiosity. "What happened to your face?" she asks, cheerfully. "Bread betrayed me," you say, mouthful. She nods. "It does that. You should talk to the midwife." You blink. "Midwife?" "She does teeth now," she says, as if this is completely normal. "Since there haven't been any births this week, diversified her skills, of course." You thank her, watch her continue on with her basket, and immediately regret asking questions. You chew another piece of bread, a little larger this time. You feel bold, and then crunch. Again. No, not again. You spit out the piece. You stare at it. It's a tiny stone, so small it could have passed for a sesame seed with self-esteem issues. You look toward the heavens, waiting for an explanation. None arrives. You slump. Pain is returning, slowly, like a very punctual tax collector. So, with the last dregs of your beer sloshing in the bowl, you make your way to the far edge of the village, where the midwife's hut sits surrounded by drying, reeds, swaddling cloth, and, for some reason, a goat skull mounted above the entrance. Symbolism maybe, or just decorative. You knock. A voice inside says, "If you're bleeding, sit down and press something clean to it. If it's emotional bleeding, try the beer lady." You clear your throat. "Tooth." "Oh," she says. "Come in. Third one this week." Inside, the hut is surprisingly bright. A reed mat is spread across the floor. Herbs hang like sleepy chandeliers. In one corner, an enormous pot of something stews quietly. It smells like honey, smoke, and mild regret. The midwife is a broad-shouldered woman with streaks of grey in her braids and fingers that look like they've caught babies, bandaged limbs, and probably fixed roof tiles during monsoon season. She waves you forward. "Let's see the rebel." You sit. She pulls out a small wooden tool. Not a pick, not a knife, something between. "Made this from a fish spine," she says proudly. "Very good for tooth extraction, or at least annoying the worm enough to leave." You blink. "You believe in the worm?" "Of course," she says. "What else would crawl into someone's head and make them chew like a broken camel?" Fair point. She peers into your mouth, makes a thoughtful humming noise, and then shakes her head. Not ready yet. Too deep. Needs softening. You raise. An eyebrow. "Beer," she explains. "But not the kind your grandmother gives you. You need the brewery blend. You've heard whispers of it. Made only by a few women in the village. Stronger. Cloudier. Brewed with bark from a river acacia and something they won't name." You ask how to get it. She grins. You trade. Or beg. You leave the midwife's hut with hope and confusion in equal measure. Back in the center of the village, the day is heating up. Children chase each other with sticks. Someone's yelling about a missing sandal. and the goat is now standing on a roof like a furry overseer. You make your way to the brewery. It's not marked. Everyone just knows where it is. Tucked near, the water's edge, shielded from direct sun, and filled with the gentle bloop 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 of pots fermenting beneath palm lids. You peek inside. A woman with a long scar down her arm and bright yellow beads in her hair looks up. You don't. Drink often, she says. You blink. How did you... She gestures at your posture. Only people in pain walk like that. You nod. I need the strong kind, you say. For a tooth. She doesn't flinch. Just scoops a bit of mash from a nearby pot and presses it into a cup. It smells worse than the previous ones, but richer somehow. Like time had a baby with vinegar and forgot to supervise it. She hands it over. Drink it warm. Swish, don't gulp, and don't scream if it burns. That's just the medicine. Talking. You do as you're told. It burns, but not in a bad way. More like it's politely scolding your pain. You sit down outside the brewery, stare out over the river, and let the hum of water, wind, and far-off goat rage lull you into a kind of peace. You're not healed, but you're beginning to think you will be. And in Nubia, that's worth a second cup. You sit on a low stone near the brewery, cradling your cup like it's a sleeping bird and not a lukewarm potion of foamy, mildly suspicious fermented grain. Around you, the River Nile slides past with the same lazy confidence as an elder who knows no one dares argue with her. The water glints in the early afternoon sun, reeds swaying like they're gossiping in the wind, and somewhere behind you, a donkey brays in a way that's almost musical. If your standards are very, very low, you take another sip. The liquid hums through your mouth, dancing over your aching gums, threading warmth through your sinuses. This beer is strong, not just in taste, but in intention. It doesn't ask you whether it should work. It tells your tooth it's going. 2. You swish it. You wait. And somewhere inside your jaw, a tiny twitch happens. Not pain. Not exactly. Just a shift. A pulling back, like whatever creature is gnawing at your nerves just blinked and said, well, maybe I'll come back later. You sigh. Victory, however minor, is still victory. The woman from the brewery steps outside and tosses a handful of grain mash to a group of chickens who appear to be running a turf war in the courtyard. She watches you for a moment, then says, Tooth? You nod, mouth still full of beer. Ferment longer next time, she says. The older it is, the more persuasive. You don't ask what that means. You're too afraid she'll say, the worm likes it sour. Instead, you drain your cup and carefully place it near the brewing pot. The woman waves you off. Keep it. It'll smell like beer forever, but it'll remind you not to eat hard bread again. You grin, half grin, really. The other half of your face is still deciding whether it wants to participate. You shuffle away, deciding to return to your grandmother's courtyard to rest. But before you make it halfway across the square, someone calls out your name. It's a boy, barely out of childhood, waving something above his head. A letter, he shouts. You blink. A letter? You didn't know anyone even wrote you letters. You barely even remember how to write. The boy jogs over, out of breath, and hands you a rolled piece of papyrus. You unroll it slowly, your fingers sticky with the memory of beer. The writing is messy, ink slightly smudged, but the meaning is clear. Your cousin's coming. Hide the beer. You sigh. Loudly. You'd almost forgotten about that cousin. The one from the northern village who claims he studied in the capital, wears linen like it's armor, and insists everyone calls him scholar, even though the only thing he's published is an opinion about goat hair dyes. And sure enough, by late afternoon, he arrives. Riding on a creaky cart, pulled by the world's angriest donkey, he waves like he's returning from a triumphant war. You watch from a distance. He hops off, adjusts his linen tunic, which is somehow both too clean and too smug, and spots you instantly. Cousin, he calls. You look inflamed. Thank you, you say, flatly. I brought knowledge, he says, holding up a thick scroll. You blink. What kind? Medical, he beams. From Alexandria, of course. Historians still argue whether Nubian scholars regularly interacted with their Egyptian counterparts, or whether that was more of a diplomatic fantasy. But your cousin is living proof that at least one person made the journey, and came back more annoying than when he left. He plops down next to you, unrolling the scroll dramatically. It's covered in diagrams, teeth mostly. Some herbs, one picture. That might just be a startled fish. See here, he says, pointing. This explains the pressure points in the jaw. You squint. That's a drawing of a hand. Exactly, he says. It represents the jaw. You stare at him. He pulls out a pouch. I also brought incense sticks. Good for clearing angry spirits. You can't tell if he means your tooth or your mood. Maybe both. Still, you let him light one. The smoke curls upward, fragrant and surprisingly soothing. He hums a little tune while waving the scroll around like a priest during a ceremony. Then he pulls out a small, polished bone tool. Let me try. Something, he says. You hesitate. Deeply. But then he adds, I read about it in a very exclusive scribes forum, which, frankly, means nothing. You let him anyway. He presses the bone against your jaw and starts tapping, gently, rhythmically. To your surprise, it doesn't hurt. In fact, something about the vibration actually distracts your nerves, like your pain gets confused and leaves the room temporarily to file a complaint. You close your eyes. He starts muttering something in broken Greek. You don't know the words, but you catch a phrase that sounds suspiciously like, bless this infected barbarian. You don't even correct him. You're too relaxed. The pain isn't gone. Not completely. But it's shrinking, like a puddle under Nubian sun. When you open your eyes again, the scroll is packed away. The incense is burned down. And your cousin is scribbling something onto a bit of cloth with charcoal. What's that? You ask. New theory, he says. Tooth pain might be connected to foot pressure. I'm working on a shoe insert. You nod slowly. He might be ridiculous, but he's family, and he brought incense. As the sun begins to dip, casting golden light across the village, you return once more to your grandmother's courtyard. She looks at you, at the puffiness of your cheek, at the weird scroll dust on your sleeve. She nods. You found help. You smile. This time, with both sides of your face. Sort of. She hands you another root. Chew, and don't let your cousin treat the goat again. You laugh, softly, and lean back against the wall. The goat stares at you from the corner. There's mud on her horns, probably from someone's laundry pile. You stare back. You've been through herbs, beer, incense, bone tapping, and scroll debates. And while the pain still lingers like an unwanted guest, you feel stronger now, more patient, more fermented, maybe. You take a slow breath. This is healing, Nubian style. A mix of tradition, science, superstition, and mildly alarming livestock, and you wouldn't trade it for anything. You wake up to the low, throaty croak of a heron fishing in the reeds, its feathers puffed in judgment as if it's been silently critiquing your sleep posture all night. Your back is stiff from resting against a sun-warmed wall, your legs curled under the goat's watchful eye, and your face, well, your face still feels like it's hosting a thunderstorm. But the pain is duller now, blunted, as if the worst of the worm's tantrum has passed, and what's left is just the echo. You stretch, wincing only slightly, and peer around the courtyard. The sun is still low, barely casting fingers of light through the thatched fencing. Somewhere beyond the hut, someone is grinding grain, the rhythmic scrape of stone on stone creating a kind of ancient lullaby. Your grandmother appears with a small clay bowl and sets it beside you without a word. Inside is a thick, sticky mash, sorghum, fermented dates, and a dusting of powdered fenugreek. Breakfast, but also medicine. In Nubia, the line between the two is always a little blurry. You take a cautious bite, chewing slowly on the right side of your mouth, where your teeth are still loyal. The flavor is earthy and sweet, with just a whisper of bitterness that reminds you of tree bark and unresolved trauma. It helps. A little. And so, with your belly half full and your tooth only mildly, mutinous you stand. You have a new mission today, not just survival, but understanding. Because somewhere in the haze of beer, herbs, incense, and unsolicited cousinly interventions, you've begun to wonder, how did the Nubians figure all this out? Who was the first person to ferment beer, not just for a party, but for pain? Who looked at a crumbling stalk of wheat, a bubbling vat, and said, "Yes, this will fix the inside of my head"? You make your way toward the elder's bench. In every Nubian village, there's always that one elder, the one who remembers things they never saw, tells stories that might be dreams, and gives advice that sounds suspiciously like riddles. Ours is named Teti. Teti is already seated under the fig tree, peeling a mango with a knife so blunt it might as well be a spoon. He looks up as you approach and narrows one eye. "Still swollen," he says. You nod. "You need a story," he adds. "Better than a root, but longer to chew." You sit beside him, adjusting your weight so the goat can't sneak behind you and chew your sash again. Teti leans back and begins. Long ago, before the river forgot how to flood properly, the Nubians were hungry. Not for food, for answers. Our teeth hurt, our bones creaked, and no one could figure out why. You nod. This feels promising. So we turned to what we had: grains, herbs, and time. Time? You ask. He nods. Fermentation, child. Time is the invisible ingredient. Leave anything long enough, and it becomes either dangerous or sacred. Beer walks the line. You glance toward the brewery, where the pots still bubble with lazy menace. Back then, Teti continues, we didn't know about bacteria, but we knew what helped. People who drank certain batches healed faster. Their infections didn't. Spread. Their fevers broke. You lean in. Historians still argue, he says with a wink, whether we understood what was happening or just got lucky. But either way, the beer worked. You chew that over for a bit. Mentally, not physically. Your jaw's still on protest duty. So it wasn't just the beer. Teti chuckles. Of course not. Nubian healing was always about layers. You chewed roots, burned leaves, whispered prayers, and drank things that smelled like wet sandals. We didn't trust any one method too much. Nature's tricky. Sometimes she gives you a cure, sometimes a curse, often both. You nod slowly. Breeze rustles the fig leaves, sending a soft rain of dry petals down onto your tunic. The air smells of clay, firewood, and the kind of mystery that only old people seem to exhale. You decide to ask the question that's been bugging you. But how did we learn which plants helped? Teti grins, revealing 3 teeth of his own, each pointing in slightly different directions. Trial and error, child. Mostly error. You blink. We watch the goats, he says, gesturing to the aforementioned menace now balancing on a basket. They ate everything. The ones who lived, we took notes. You laugh, and then immediately regret it. Your tooth stabs you in protest. Teti pats your knee. Which reminds me, go fetch some honey bark from the grove. You stand, wincing again. Another remedy, or a distraction, he shrugs. Same thing when your jaw's on fire. So you head down to the edge of the village, toward the trees where Nubians grow not only food but medicine. These groves are cared for like temples: acacia, fig, palm, tamarind, and in the shadow of taller trees, delicate clusters of wild herbs and medicinal weeds. Nothing grows here by accident. As you walk, you spot a woman hunched over a shallow basket, sorting dried leaves into piles. She waves you over. You looking for pain leaf? She asks. You nod. She hands you a strip of something that smells like burnt orange peel and regret. Chew it with beer, she says. Not sweet beer, the bitter kind. You thank her and continue on. At the honeybark tree, a stubby, gnarled creature that looks like it's been through several bad relationships, you scrape off a bit of bark with a stone shard and tuck it into your pouch. Back at your grandmother's hut, you mash the bark into your beer, swirl it with a twig, and sip. It tastes like someone tried to ferment tree sap with a hint of foot. But within minutes, your jaw loosens. The pain doesn't vanish, but it moves, slides backward, like it's retreating to its lair. And for the first time in days, you feel like maybe you're winning. As you lean back against the sun-warmed wall, Goat curled beside you, Tetty's voice echoes in your head. Time is the invisible ingredient. Maybe. So, and in this land of sand, stone, stories, and sour brews, time may be the best medicine of all. You sit there longer than planned, breathing in that odd blend of wet reeds, warm honey, and river mint, and slowly begin to realize that your pain, though not gone, has begun to transform. What started as a sharp dagger in your mouth has become a kind of soft throb, still present but distant, as if your body has chosen to hum a lullaby over its suffering. The balm clings to your skin, drying into a gentle crust that crinkles slightly every time you smile. You try it, smiling just a little, and it surprises you how much more of your face joins in. It's been a few days since you felt your cheekbones without flinching, and then the fishman returns. This time, he's holding something new, a carved figurine, no taller than your hand, shaped like a lion-headed goddess. He sets it down beside you reverently and says, "Sekhmet, borrowed. She's on loan." You raise an eyebrow. She helps with illness, and sometimes the pain is spiritual, not physical. You glance at your swollen jaw. It's very physical, you say. "Even so," he nods solemnly. "Offer her something." "What?" "Whatever you have that's valuable." You reach into your satchel and pull out a flat piece of date bread that's been traveling with you since yesterday. It's hard enough to be used as a roof tile. You set it beside Sekhmet. "She'll appreciate the gesture," he says, "even if she can't chew it." You laugh, carefully. He bows and disappears again into the reeds. And now it's just you and Sekhmet, side by side, watching the river. Time flows, and in this place, in this land, carved by sand and sun and story, even pain becomes part of the narrative. You're not just enduring it, you're participating in an ancient rite, one experienced by Nubian farmers and priests, mothers and soldiers, goat herders and scribes. They all had teeth, and eventually they all had toothaches. You imagine a young warrior on the eve of battle, half his face swollen, sipping beer through a hollowed fig stem. You imagine a priest rubbing honey paste into his gums before entering the temple. You imagine a mother trying not to wince as she bites into a ceremonial loaf, her child beside her, oblivious to the silent war happening in her mouth. And you, now, part of this great lineage of the dentally cursed, sip your beer, touch the side of your face, and feel gratitude. Not just for the slight relief, but for the bizarre, beautiful ecosystem of healing around you. Because what began as a lonely, throbbing curse has become a village-wide ritual. Every old woman with a herb, every goat with a stare, every cousin with a theory, every fish with a dubious reputation. This, you realize, is how people healed before clinics and capsules. Not alone. Not quickly, but together, through time, through trial, through enough fermented drinks to fill a royal bathtub. You rise slowly, stretch your back, and tuck Sekhmet carefully into your pouch. The balm is flaking now, and your face smells like mint and river, but your pain, manageable. You walk back toward the village with more steadiness than before. A few villagers nod as you pass, and one says, "The swelling's gone down." You thank her. The goat sees you, trots over, and gently, but decisively, bites the hem of your tunic. Some things, apparently, don't change. You return to your grandmother's, home just as the shadows grow long. She sees you, lifts her chin in that way that says, "Well?" You smile. She grins back. "Good. I was almost out of bark." Later that evening, as you sit near the fire, the stars open above you like 1,000. tiny scars across the night, someone starts playing the flute, soft and slow, like the breeze. Your cousin lies nearby, muttering calculations about jaw vibrations and melon seeds. Your grandmother snores gently in the corner, her chin tucked into her collar. You touch your jaw once more. It doesn't hurt. Not really. Not anymore. And as the warmth of the flames dances across your skin, you begin to drift. Not just into sleep, but into the collective hum of history, carried forward by beer, bark, and the quiet certainty that every pain, no matter how ancient, has an answer. You just have to stay still long enough to hear it. The morning turns to midday as you sit in your grandmother's shaded courtyard, that now familiar clay beer cup balanced on your lap. A light breeze dances through the air, stirring the edge of the linen cloth covering your head, and for the first time in days, the pounding in your jaw feels more like a whisper than a war cry. Your face is still swollen, no miracle there, but the sharp electric flashes of pain have dulled into something almost tolerable. Almost. The beer has helped. The bark, the roots, the prayers, maybe even your cousin's bizarre acupuncture scroll, have helped. Or perhaps it's just the fact that everyone in the village seems personally invested in your dental survival, cheering you on like a one-person festival. Which brings us to today's uninvited development. You're summoned, not by your grandmother, not by the healer, not by the beer woman, but by the local fisherman. He appears just before the sun hits its peak, barefoot, damp, and smelling faintly of algae and raw ambition. You, he says, pointing dramatically, are coming with me. Why? You ask, weary. He grins. Because your pain has inspired me. That is, new. He pulls from his satchel a small squirming fish and holds it up triumphantly. This fish, he announces, has healing properties. You must bite it. You blink. I'm not sure that's... It worked for my uncle, he interrupts. He bit it and his knee stopped hurting, possibly unrelated but still. Bite the fish. You glance down at the slippery creature. It's staring at you. You're not biting it. But, because this is Nubia, and because your curiosity is stronger than your common sense, you follow him to the riverbank anyway. Here, at the edge of the Nile, shaded by palm fronds and gossiping egrets, he presents his full theory. That fish, he says, feeds on plants near the healing rocks, the same rocks the old priestesses used, so it carries the essence of pain removal. Or, you say, it's just a fish. History still debates the difference, he replies, not missing a beat. You crouch beside him as he rinses a bowl in the shallows and begins mixing a strange paste of crushed river mint, sand-warmed honey, and dried catfish scales. This is the good stuff, he explains. I call it jaw balm. You stare. He gestures for you to tilt your head, and like someone who has truly given up control of their life to the universe, you let him dab the balm along your swollen cheek. It tingles. Not unpleasantly, though it definitely smells like sadness and pond water. You sit there, watching the ripples on the Nile, as the fisherman hums to himself and tells you the origin story of the fish cure. Long ago, he begins, a great Nubian queen had a terrible toothache, the kind that made her yell at clouds. Her healers tried everything. Honey, smoke, beetle shells. Nothing worked. You nod, familiar. So she walked to the river, he continues, and prayed to the Nile. And the Nile sent her a fish. She bit it. The pain vanished. You raise an eyebrow. No one saw this, he admits. But I feel it in my bones. Right. Despite the oddness, the balm is working. Your jaw feels cool. The swelling seems to relax under the layer of mint and... mystery. You sit there for what feels like an hour, letting the river do its slow dance while the sun paints lazy, shadows on your skin. Eventually he pats your shoulder. That's it, he says. The jaw balm has sealed your aura. Great, you reply. I was worried about my aura. He grins and walks off to chase a heron with a fishing spear, whistling as he goes. You take a moment. You reflect. What is it about this place that makes everyone a part-time dentist? Maybe it's the culture, maybe it's survival instinct, or maybe pain when shared becomes less about agony and more about community sport. Back at the village, you rinse your face, careful not to disrupt the balm too much. The smell lingers, but honestly, it's better than yesterday's fermented bark meets despair aroma. At midday meal, you're served soft lentils, barley cakes, and a cooled broth flavoured with coriander and cloves. Your cousin appears mid-bite, waving a scroll and announcing that he's discovered tooth frequency theory. You do not ask. Instead, you chew, gingerly, only on the safe side of your mouth, letting the food's spices ease into your senses. The cloves in particular hit your tongue with a gentle numbing buzz. Another ancient remedy you remember. Clove oil has long been used to dull pain. The Nubians probably didn't isolate it chemically, but they understood the effect. In fact, archaeologists once discovered clove remnants in a Nubian burial site, neatly packed beside a tooth comb and a small jar of fermented paste. Historians still argue whether the paste was ceremonial or simply medicine that expired sometime, around 400 BCE. Either way, you're grateful for it now. You finish your meal and lie back on a woven mat beneath the tamarind tree. The sky above is vast and quiet. Occasionally, the wind carries the faint bleating of a goat or the slap of laundry against stone. A neighbour passes by and comments, "You look less cursed today." You take it as a compliment. You close your eyes. Your cousin starts tapping nearby stones in a rhythm he claims aligns with jaw harmonics. You ignore him. The pain is still there, but now it feels smaller. Tired even. Like it's had its fun and is thinking about retiring. You breathe deeply and let your thoughts drift. Somewhere, someone is grinding more beer mash. Somewhere else, a healer is boiling another bark, and someone, somewhere, still believes a fish can cure a toothache. And maybe, just maybe, they're not entirely wrong. You're woken by the sound of something dripping. It takes a moment to realize what it is. Rain. Not a full storm. Not even proper rain, really. Just the hesitant kind. The sort that trickles softly onto rooftops and palm fronds, as if the sky itself is testing the temperature below. The kind that never reaches the soil, just dances on leaves and disappears into the air. Still, it's enough to stir the village into murmurs. Rain in this part of Nubia isn't exactly rare, but it's special, a kind of invitation, a signal. When it comes, even lightly, everyone listens. You rise slowly from your mat, body warm from sleep, and skin tingling with the scent of last night's firewood. Your jaw feels better today. Not perfect, but better. The swelling has faded to a manageable puff, and the sharpness has dulled to the kind of ache you can ignore if you breathe just right and don't try to chew anything crunchier than overcooked lentils. Your grandmother hands you a damp cloth and a curious look. "Today's the day," she says. You blink. "The day for what?" She lifts her eyebrows. "The archivist." "Ah, of course. Every so often, the archivist visits your village. A wanderer, somewhere between scholar, healer, and story hoarder. No one knows exactly where they live, or what their job is beyond keeping the old things remembered. They appear when needed, or when curious, or when someone writes a letter sealed with fig sap and good intentions. Your grandmother insists that archivists don't read time like normal people. They read memories, she told you once, like bees read flowers. So, after breakfast, soft, porridge, a mint leaf tucked inside. You find yourself standing at the edge of the square, waiting beside a goat that refuses to acknowledge your existence. And then they arrive, not on horseback or with a donkey, but walking. Slow, deliberate steps. A person wrapped in linen the colour of storm clouds, face mostly hidden beneath a deep hood. They carry a scroll, a staff, and what appears to be a small jar filled with something that might be dried rose petals, or possibly beetle legs. "Archivist," your cousin whispers reverently, clutching a fresh scroll. "Archivist," your grandmother nods, not bowing but somehow managing to imply it. You just stand there. The archivist stops in front of you and tilts their head. You're the one with the tooth, they say. Their voice is neither male nor female, just even, smooth, like the surface of a river before a crocodile pops up. You nod. They nod back. Good. We'll need your story. And just like that, they walk past you toward your grandmother's home. You follow, like a character in a dream you're not writing. Inside, the archivist kneels by the fire pit, sets down their scroll and staff, and gestures for you to sit. Your cousin tries to linger in the doorway until your grandmother hisses at him, and he retreats with dramatic sighs and the kind of offended dignity only he could summon. You sit. The archivist opens the scroll. It's not empty, but it's not filled either. Just a few lines. Your name, maybe. A sketch of a jawbone. A smudge of something that might be your cousin's handwriting and definitely isn't helpful. I need to understand your pain, the archivist says, but not just the feeling, the story. You nod, slowly. So you begin. You start with the tooth, the first twinge, the way it crept in like a whispered warning. You talk about the failed remedies, the roots and bark, the beer, the cousin with scrolls, the goat, because of course the goat, and even the fisherman's jaw balm and goddess statue. The archivist listens. Not once do they interrupt. Their head tilts slightly with each new detail, as if weighing the truth of your words not with logic, but with rhythm. When you finish, they remain silent for a while. Then, pain is a signal, but healing is a story. You blink. They lean forward, slightly. Tell me what it meant. You hesitate, because no one ever asks that part. Not your cousin, not the healer, not even your grandmother. But something about the archivist's stillness pulls the truth from you. It meant I had to slow down, you say. To listen, to everyone, even the ridiculous ones. They nod. And? You pause again. It made me remember how much people care, even if they express it by stuffing honey bark into your beer, or arguing over vibration scrolls, or offering you a fish with an unsettling amount of eye contact. The archivist reaches into their satchel and pulls out a small, flat stone. On it is carved a faint symbol, something between a spiral and a tooth. They press it into your palm, for the record, they say, to keep the story alive. You clutch it, warm from their hands, and realize your jaw doesn't ache at all right now. They rise, gather their things, and before you can thank them, they're already halfway out the door. Your grandmother watches them go. They took your pain, she says. You glance at the stone. Not exactly. No, she agrees, but they made it worth something. Later that afternoon, the clouds clear. The drizzle stops. The sun filters through the fig leaves and paints gold on the dusty walls. You wander toward the brewery again, not because you need more beer, but because it feels like the right place to reflect. The woman there offers you a cup. This one's been resting longer, she says, aged like wisdom. You sip. It's stronger, sharper, but smoother too, like it knows what it is. And as it warms your throat and settles in your belly, you feel something shift. Not in your mouth, but in your heart. That pain, that annoying, persistent ache, it brought you here, to roots and fishmen and archivists, and scrolls and balm and stories. And somehow, in all of that, you found not just relief, but meaning. You smile, fully this time. Even the goat notices. You wake up the next day to something you haven't felt in what seems like forever. Actual peace in your jaw. No throbbing, no stabbing, no dull ache wrapped in sarcasm. Just quiet. It's the kind of silence that only follows a storm. Not emptiness, but rest. Your tongue pokes at your back molar out of sheer habit. Still there, still whole. Maybe even slightly less resentful than before. You sit up slowly, stretch, and smile. Cautiously at first, then fully, testing your range. The swelling has softened. Your face feels less like a baked yam, and for the first time all week, you're confident enough to chew something other than steamed porridge. The victory is small, but real. Even your grandmother notices. You look slightly less haunted, she says, as she hands you a piece of spiced bread. I'll light a fire later to scare off whatever's left in your jaw. You munch the bread, gently, respectfully, and your teeth cooperate. The relief is so profound you nearly tear up. But of course, this wouldn't be Nubia if you were allowed a full day of peace. Today, your cousin announces, bursting through the reed curtain like he's being chased by a revelation. We test the final theory. No, you reply instinctively. Yes, he insists. The historical method demands it. You sigh. Your cousin has recently decided he is a Nubian scientist, a historian, and possibly a prophet. All of these roles, unfortunately, involve you. We need to visit the tomb, he adds. Whose tomb? Old Mika's. He was a dentist. You blink. We had dentists? Technically, he was a stone carver who sometimes helped people with the tooth demon, but that's basically the same thing. This is how you find yourself, again, walking through the dry brush toward a low, sand-covered mound at the edge of the village. The so-called tomb is more a collapsed shelter than a grand resting place, but it does have a carved stone outside with faint images of teeth, a lion, and what looks suspiciously like someone screaming. This, your cousin, declares, is the sacred site of Nubian dental innovation. Historians still argue whether that's what this was, you say. He grins. Exactly, which means we can claim whatever we want. You enter the tomb, crouching low through a cracked entrance, sunlight spearing through holes in the roof, illuminating a space filled with old pottery, weathered scroll fragments, and a smell that can only be described as archaeologically disappointing. Your cousin sets down a bundle and unwraps it dramatically. A handmade replica of Mika's dental tools. Thin sticks, a string, a carved bone pick, and a tiny hammer that should never go near a human mouth. We are going to honor his work, he says, by recreating a treatment. You stare at him. He stares back, then says, on me. You blink. He gestures to his front tooth. It's been wiggling for days. I think Mecca's spirit wants us to complete his last cure. This is either very brave or very stupid. You take the bone pick. The tooth is indeed wiggly, probably from excessive chewing on sugarcane or all the dramatics he's been doing with scrolls clenched between his teeth. You gently press the tool against the gum, muttering something that sounds vaguely ceremonial. Your cousin closes his eyes, dramatically still. You don't pull the tooth, just poke it gently, enough to let him feel the moment. He yelps. You're cured, you say solemnly. He nods. I feel transformed. Later, back in the village, he wraps his head in linen and walks with a limp, even though the issue was with his tooth, and declares himself the first modern Nubian patient. You don't argue. Instead, you spend the afternoon sitting near the fire pit with your grandmother, shelling beans and listening to the distant shouts of your cousin, trying to give dental advice to a baby goat. She glances at you. He's ridiculous, she says. You nod. Then she hands you something wrapped in cloth. You open it. Inside is a tiny jar of dark paste. Use it once a day, she says, just to keep the memory of pain away. What is it? She shrugs. Old recipe. Dates, ash, bitter root, maybe a little beer. Of course. That evening, the village gathers in the square for one of those slow Nubian celebrations that doesn't start or stop at any particular time. Someone brings drums. Someone else brings a dish of ground herbs that tastes like spicy mud. A few children run in circles, chasing each other with woven fans. Even the goat is there, wearing a necklace made from fig stems and inexplicably supervising the younger kids. You sit with your back against a warm stone wall, watching the stars blink into place. A neighbour offers you a drink. It's beer again, but this one is infused with mint and papyrus flower. It smells like hope. You sip, and realise somehow the pain is not just gone. It's been transformed into something bigger, something like history, because healing in Nubia isn't about pills or instant cures. It's about participating. It's about the rituals, the herbs, the scrolls, the goat-related drama. It's about accepting that every remedy is a layer in a much larger story. one that includes generations, mistakes, laughter, and fermented drinks. You take another sip and breathe deeply. You're not just better, you're part of something now. The morning air in the village feels different now. It's lighter somehow, less burdened by your discomfort, and more filled with the lazy rhythm of people returning to their routines. The baker's firewood crackles in the distance. Birds quarrel in the fig trees, and someone nearby is pounding grain with the half-hearted energy of a teenager who's already planning how to get out of their afternoon chores. You sit cross-legged on the woven mat outside your grandmother's home, a cool bowl of water in your lap. Your fingers trace slow circles in it, half awake, half enchanted by the fact that your jaw still doesn't hurt. Not a bit. Not even when you yawn. You're not used to this. The absence of pain is strange. A silence in a room that used to echo with complaints. Your grandmother notices. She leans out the doorway and mutters, "Don't get cocky," then tosses you a bundle of dried herbs and disappears back inside. The herbs smell like bitter fennel and sunburnt sage. You know the drill. Boil, gargle, repeat. You're not sick anymore. But in this village, treatment continues long after the symptoms have left. "We don't just kill the snake," your grandmother once said. "We also scare away the eggs." Today, though, you're not thinking about herbs or eggs or even jaw demons. Today, your thoughts drift to something bigger. History, not the grand kind with empires and battles, but the everyday kind, the people, the pots, the beer, the plants, and the oddly helpful fish. Your week of pain has turned you into an unwilling scholar of Nubian health rituals. And now that your head is clear, you find yourself genuinely curious. Why did beer work? What herbs mattered most? And what did your ancestors do when the pain didn't go away? So, with a loose plan and looser sandals, you set off through the village. Not in search of a cure this time, but in search of knowledge. Your first stop is the house of Hekar, the village elder, who supposedly knows every herb that grows between here and the fifth cataract. You find him under a tree, snoring into a bowl of dried dates. You wait. Eventually, he snorts awake, blinks at you and says, "Ah, the tooth hero." You sit beside him and explain what you're after. Knowledge, history, wisdom, maybe even a few secrets that aren't written in scrolls or sung by bards with dramatic hand gestures. Hekar scratches his chin. "You want the truth about pain?" You nod. He picks up a small rock and tosses it into the distance. "You're not going to find it in scrolls," he says. "Pain isn't a recipe. It's a riddle." You try not to sigh, but he continues. "Still, there are things worth knowing." He rummages in a bag and pulls out a faded reed basket filled with dried roots and powders. One by one he introduces you. "This is mustard bark. Burns the tongue, but it shocks the gums into behaving." You sniff it. "It smells like revenge." "This is lull root. Boil it in goat milk and whisper to it. You'll sleep like a stuffed lizard." You raise an eyebrow. "You have to talk to it." He nods solemnly. Everything listens. "And this, on?" you ask, pointing to a small bundle of red twigs tied with snake leather. He glances around, then leans closer. "That's red dancer root. Only use it if the pain starts singing." You don't know what that means. You don't ask. Instead, you help him sort a few bundles while he tells you stories. Half facts, half riddles. He talks about a Nubian queen who lost all her molars in a duel with a rival priestess over mango rights. He mentions a healer who swore by elephant sweat as a cure for headaches. He speaks of lost villages that built shrines to tooth spirits and left offerings of honeycomb and silver beads. Historians still argue whether these stories are literal, metaphorical, or the product of too much fermented papyrus tea. But they live on, passed through mouths that hurt and healed and spoke anyway. Before you leave, Hekar hands you a tiny jar. "Old recipe," he says. "You probably won't need it. but carry it anyway. You tuck it into your satchel, next, to Sekhmet stone and your cousin's still unread scroll on vibration-based chewing. Your next visit is to the brewery, not because you're thirsty, though you are, but because you're chasing a theory. See, somewhere along the line, you heard someone mention that Nubian beer wasn't just drinkable, it was curative, and not just for teeth, but for bones, belly aches, even heartbreak. So you sit with the brewer, a woman named Dalat, who's been fermenting since she was old enough to trip over a grain basket. Of course it heals, she says, handing you a cup. There's yeast and herbs and sometimes bark shavings, and always love. You sip. It's earthy, sour, and oddly comforting. She explains that each batch has its own mood. This one is lazy, she says. Took 3 days to bubble, like a donkey in winter. She shows you her process, grinding the grains, soaking them, adding bark and herbs depending on the season. Mint in spring, coriander in summer, ginger root in fall. Winter, just pray. You watch as she stirs a new batch, the mash thick and steaming. She sings softly, an old tune about healing and storms. The beer listens, she says. It knows what you need. You believe her. As the sun begins to tilt westward, you walk back through the village, head full of roots, songs, and yeast wisdom. The goat follows you again, because of course it does. And when you reach your grandmother's house, you pause. You've seen your pain become something ancient, communal, absurd, sacred. You've talked to archivists, healers, brewers, fishmen, and historians disguised as lunatics. And somehow you don't feel like the victim of a toothache anymore. You feel like its witness, its scribe, its final chapter. By now, your reputation in the village has shifted from that poor soul with the balloon face to something bordering on legendary. Children pass you in the square and pretend to clutch their jaws, dramatically reenacting your recovery like it's part of a festival play. The brewer refers to you as the one with the healing mouth. Your cousin, of course, has started introducing you to visitors as a medical case study. You can't decide if it's flattering or just strange, but what you do know, as you sit sipping honey water under the shade of a fig tree, is that your curiosity hasn't faded just because the pain did. In fact, it's grown deeper, more layered, like the bark you once chewed through, hoping for relief, only to find meaning nestled in the bitter. This morning, you're planning to visit the one place you've avoided since this all began, the temple. Now, temples in Nubia aren't the looming gold-drenched towers found in travelers' scrolls, at least not in your part of the kingdom. Here, they're compact sanctuaries, stone and mud, reed roofs, painted offerings, and cool, shaded corridors where whispers seem to echo louder than shouts. Your grandmother sees you putting on your good robe, the blue one with the embroidered neck, and raises an eyebrow. Temple, she asks, more statement than question. You nod. Tell Sekhmet. I said thank you, she says. And maybe, sorry. You chuckle. For what? She knows. So off you go, ducking under awnings and stepping over sleeping goats until the path narrows into the temple road, lined with stones that are too round to stay still and too flat to trip on, which makes them feel suspiciously placed, like someone wanted you to walk slowly and pay attention. The air here smells different, cooler, stiller, like the breath of someone deep in thought. At the entrance, a young priest with a shaved head and suspiciously perfect posture greets you. Here for prayer? He asks. Something like that, you reply. He nods and steps aside, letting you slip into the shaded world of incense and iconography. The inner chamber is quiet. Light filters through narrow slits in the ceiling, casting sunbeams across the painted walls. You recognize a few scenes. Sekhmet striding across battlefields, healing the sick, fending off demons shaped like swollen molars. At least that's how you interpret the paintings. Art, like pain, is subjective. You kneel beside a modest altar, and place the small stone token you received from the archivist, the spiral tooth one, beside a bowl of offerings. Dried figs, carved amulets, and one particularly tragic-looking chicken feather sit among the tributes. You silently add a small, dried date from your pouch. "Thank you," you whisper, "for the weird, winding path." You stay there longer than you expect, not talking, not praying, just being, letting the stone cool your knees and the silence soothe your thoughts. Then, a voice behind you. "Tooth pain?" You look up to see the priest again, carrying a small ceramic jar. "Not anymore," you answer. "But I'm collecting the stories." He smiles gently. "Then you should read this." He hands you the jar. You expect something medicinal, but when you open it, it contains tiny scrolls, paper-thin papyrus strips, curled and brittle. "These are tooth records," he explains, "from pilgrims, some centuries old. We keep them here. No one wants to read about tooth pain, but everyone writes about it." You gently pull one out. The handwriting is spidery, like a fevered whisper. It reads, "Bit into a fig, heard a crack, wept for 2 days. Offered 3 coins and 1 shoe to the goddess. Pain left me the next morning. Took the shoe." Another scroll describes a shepherd who fasted for a week, then drank sacred beer and danced around the shrine naked until his tooth fell out. Historians still argue whether this was tradition or personal flair. Each scroll is a story, a tiny wrinkled piece of shared suffering, and you, suddenly, feel like their descendant. "These are incredible," you murmur. The priest nods. "Pain demands witnesses. That's how it loses power." You sit with the scrolls for a while longer. Some are funny, some heartbreaking, some barely legible. But all of them are real, proof that even the smallest pain becomes something meaningful when remembered. Later, as the sun rises higher and the temple grows warmer, you step back into the world. A breeze greets you with a dry kiss. The road sparkles faintly with crushed stone, and you carry the jar of scrolls carefully in your arms. "On loan," the priest said, "until your story is written." You walk past the bakery, where the bread smells dangerously fresh, past the square, where children now play a game involving molar-shaped stones and overly dramatic yelps of pretend agony, past your cousin, who is halfway through delivering a lecture to a skeptical duck about how swamp breath correlates with oral bacteria. You duck into your grandmother's house, set the jar on a shelf, and exhale. "You brought the pain home," she says, not even looking up from her stitching. "I brought the memory of it," you reply. She smiles. Same thing. That evening, you sit again by the fire. The stars blink awake. The goat lays its head in your lap without asking. You stroke its coarse fur absent-mindedly and look toward the horizon. And for a moment, you imagine all the people, across centuries, across rivers, across continents, who once sat just like this, wondering if they'd ever feel normal again. People who feared the next bite, the next twinge, the next night of restless sleep. You imagine them laughing, crying, praying, brewing, carving, chewing on dubious roots with too much confidence. And then you think, they healed, slowly, messily. But they did, just like you. The next morning, you're woken not by the ache in your jaw, not by a goat stepping on your foot, not even by your cousin practicing his healing incantations under the fig tree again, but by a strange tapping sound at the door. Tap, tap, tap. It's rhythmic. Too polite to be urgent. Too consistent to be a bird. You open the curtain. It's Nala, the village record keeper. Now, Nala is a mystery wrapped in a scroll. She's somewhere between 30 and eternal. She keeps no goats, owns no sandals, and speaks only in complete sentences. Her hut has no windows, only a slit in the roof for moonlight. She's the kind of person who knows things you didn't even realize you'd forgotten. And right now, she's standing on your doorstep with a basket full of scrolls, a serious face, and, curiously, a jar of fermented honey. You've been selected, she says. You blink. For what? For the oral archives, she replies. It's time your story was written down properly. You hesitate. I'm not sure it's worth archiving. It was just a bad tooth. She raises an eyebrow in that way people do, when you've clearly missed the point of your own life. Pain, she says, is what binds memory to meaning. You've walked a path. Others need to walk it too, even if only through words. You glance back inside your house, at the jar of temple scrolls, the stone token from the archivist, the scroll your cousin made that now serves as a very mediocre fan. Maybe Nala's right. So, you follow her. Her hut smells like old bark, cool ink, and something faintly peppery. Scrolls line every wall, piled in clusters organized not by topic, but by mood. One corner is clearly for rage, another for heartbreak. A third is for sudden joy with side effects. You suspect your scroll will go there. Nala sits cross-legged on a mat, rolls out a fresh strip of papyrus, and dips her brush. Start from the moment the pain began, she says. Not just the facts, the feeling. So you tell her. You tell her about the dull throb on the first day and how it felt like your own body had decided to sabotage your week. About the chewed bark, the first failed remedies, the moment your cousin became an unsolicited medical expert. You describe the taste of the early beers, the ones that didn't help much, and the one batch that changed everything. You describe the fishman, the goat, the shrine, the archivist, the brewer, the priest, the scrolls. You even talk about the fear, the part you rarely say out loud, that deep, sneaky dread that maybe it wasn't just a bad tooth. Maybe it was something permanent, something unfixable, something that would make you feel broken forever. That's the part people need, Nala says quietly. They need to know someone else felt that. She writes as you speak. Her brush glides like it's not even touching the scroll, like it's catching your words mid-air and translating them into ink. When you finish, she doesn't say anything for a long time. Then she adds one last line herself. Recovered, yes, but changed. You smile. Is that the title? She shakes her head. No title. Just truth. She rolls the scroll gently, seals it with wax, and places it in the corner labeled Wounds That Taught Something. You walk out into the late afternoon light, skin warmed, spirit slightly floaty. Back home, your grandmother is baking something that smells like celebration. Did she write it down? She asks, not even looking up. You nod. She write about the goat? You nod again. Good. It earned its place. That night, you sit by the fire once more. Your cousin joins you, brandishing a new scroll titled Tooth Theory Volume 2, which you pretend to read while sipping a warm cup of coriander-spiced milk. The stars shimmer. A gentle wind picks up, carrying the scent of tamarind and something, vaguely like old leather. Someone across the square is humming. A baby cries once, then settles. You exhale deeply. It's strange, isn't it? The way pain can become poetry. The way a toothache can unlock a 1,000-year story. The way even the smallest suffering can ripple through time, etched in scrolls, sung in temples, whispered in beer recipes, and recorded by scribes who understand. That meaning isn't always found in grand battles, but sometimes in surviving something small and learning to smile again after. You close your eyes. The fire crackles beside you. The goat snores at your feet. And for the first time in days, sleep comes easily because now the pain is gone. But the story remains. You dream of rivers. Not just any rivers, but the Nile itself, winding like a silver serpent through the cracked skin of Nubia. In the dream, you're drifting downstream in a reed boat, tiny and soft as a fig leaf, surrounded by sounds that shouldn't feel so peaceful. Frogs clicking like old gears, birds squabbling over fish bones, and the eternal hush of reeds brushing reeds. There's something in the boat with you, a jar. You open it, and inside, instead of papyrus or honey or herbs, is your own voice. Not speaking, just humming, faintly. It smells like warm beer and old stories. You wake slowly, the dream clinging to your ribs like wet linen. It's early, very early. The sky is still dim, painted in pre-sun blues and sleepy greys. The village hasn't fully stirred yet, except for a few roosters who apparently skipped their bedtime. You get up, stretch, and step outside barefoot. The dirt is cool underfoot. A single pot of millet porridge steams on a neighbour's fire. Far off, someone coughs like they've done it for generations. But what draws your attention is the group of travellers at the village edge, unusual for this time of year. 4 of them. 1 on a donkey, 2 walking. 1 carrying a musical instrument made from crocodile skin and something that looks like optimism. You approach cautiously. They notice you and bow slightly, enough to be respectful, not enough to make it weird. Peace, 1 says. Peace, you reply. We seek the tooth keeper, the donkey rider announces. You blink. The what now? The one who healed with beer, whose pain travelled into the temple and came out carved in ink. The one whose story sits. With the scribes of Nala, you stare. You mean me? Yes, he says solemnly. You consider denying it. Maybe point to your cousin, who's busy behind a bush attempting to teach the goat how to nod on command. But you don't. Instead, you sigh and gesture toward your home. Come in. There's warm millet. Inside, they sit cross-legged around your mat. They unwrap bundles filled with gifts. Dried saffron, a curious shell from a river delta, and a small scroll written in symbols you don't recognize. They explain they've travelled from a cluster of villages 3 days south, where infections spread faster than stories, and a child recently cried through a week of swelling and fever with no relief. They heard rumours of you. The tale reached us by boatmen, 1 explains. A man who drank from your brewer's jar and swore he heard the goddess whisper to his molars. You don't know whether to laugh, cry, or offer a toothbrush. Instead, you listen, and slowly a plan begins to form. Not one of heroism or magic cures, but of teaching. So for the rest of the morning, you show them what you've learned. Not just the methods, but the stories. You teach them how to grind bark into powder and soak it in beer until the bitterness turns polite. How to trace the nerves along, the jaw with warmed stone. How to hold someone's hand when they're too embarrassed to admit they're afraid. You speak of Sekhmet's temple, of the archive scrolls, of the brewer's secret batches, of Hekar's ridiculous root jar, and the time the goat tried to steal your rinse bowl. They write everything down. Even the goat nods in approval. Finally. And when the travellers leave, you hand them a small pouch of dried herbs, a folded piece of papyrus with your grandmother's old recipe. You've edited out the bit about whispering to fire, and a small clay token, a spiral tooth, carved with care. They thank you. 1 kisses your forehead. Another simply whispers, "It will help." You watch them go, a speck of calm moving steadily into the unknown. Later you return to Nala's hut. She's copying a scroll in silence, her brush dancing like wind in grass. I need to add to my story, you say. She doesn't even look up, already left a space. You tell her about the travellers, the gifts, the teaching. She listens, writing only the final sentence herself again. The cure continued. That evening, as shadows stretch long across Nubia and the moon spills silver, over the roof of your house, you sit on the edge of your bed, cradling a bowl of steamed dates in one hand and a cooling cloth in the other. Not for yourself this time, for your cousin who accidentally bit down on a particularly aggressive pebble hidden in his bread and is now lying dramatically under a blanket, moaning like an opera singer who's just stubbed their soul. You grin. Should I call the goat? You ask. He groans louder. She's not licensed. You dab his jaw gently, place a sprig of lulroot under his tongue and whisper. Everything listens. He mumbles, even the goat. You nod. He sighs. Fine, just don't write this part down. You absolutely will, because the story continues. And even though you're healed, you're not done. Because healing in Nubia isn't a finish line, it's a relay. And you, my friend, are now the one holding the torch. The morning after your cousin's Pebble tragedy, you wake to find the goat wearing your grandmother's scarf like a victory sash. Your cousin is already bragging to passing neighbours about how he bravely endured his own molar emergency with the courage of a war general, conveniently forgetting the part where he cried because the rinse water was too judgmental. You let him have it. Every good story needs a hero, even if it's mostly fiction. You, however, have other plans. Word of your story has started moving faster than gossip in a millet queue. A traveller from the east arrived last night just to shake your hand. He didn't even have a toothache, just a fascination with oral legends. You're not sure if he meant dentistry or poetry. So today, you set your sights on something new. Not fame, not cures, but preservation. Because if the pain can return, so can the knowledge. And you know better than anyone how easily stories vanish when no one writes them down, or worse, when they're rewritten by people who weren't there. You decide to start a new archive, not in Nala's hut. Her scrolls already breathe enough history to sing you to sleep. Not in the temple, that's sacred ground and heavy with rules. No, you'll build something different. A healer's wall. A place where people can carve their pain and their remedies. Short, honest, and a little messy. Like truth usually is. So, you walk the village perimeter, eyes scanning mud brick fences and broken kiln walls, looking for the right one. Smooth enough for carving, strong enough to hold time, shaded enough to preserve what's written. You find it behind the brewer's house, a sun-baked curve of clay with a soft curve that begs for storytelling. You test it by pressing your finger into a sun-bleached patch. The clay accepts it like an old friend. Perfect. You fetch your tools. A carving stick from your grandmother's kitchen. She protests. A bowl of cooling mud to help etch the letters. And your first story. Yours. It takes you half the day to carve. It. Not because it's long, you keep it tight, but because your hands shake a little. Not from fear, from reverence. When you finish, you read it back. Toothache for 7 nights. Cured by fermented bark beer and an annoying goat. Left changed, not broken. You underline the word changed with a small spiral tooth symbol. That's your mark now. By the end of the day, 3 others have added their tales. One simply reads, bitter date stone, cried, prayed, slept, woke up fine, still scared of dates. Another, more poetic, swelling at moonrise, whispered to Sekhmet under the fig tree. Pain gone by sunrise. Don't tell my husband, I used his good beer. The third is a child's scribble, a frowning face with one jagged tooth and a stick figure holding a fish. Art. People begin visiting, some to read, some to write, some just to touch the clay. Even the temple priest stops by, trailing incense and curiosity. He smiles at your carving and adds a tiny symbol beneath it. A sun with 3 dots. You don't know what it means. He just winks. Your grandmother watches from her doorway, arms crossed. You know this wall's going to make people lazy, right? She grumbles. Next, they'll want you to cure stubbed toes. You grin. Only if they write about it. That night, the stars stretch long and slow over the village. Fires flicker like sleepy thoughts. Somewhere, a drum taps in rhythm with the wind. You sit beneath your newly carved wall, back against the clay, goat curled beside you, and scroll in your lap. You're writing again. Not just your story, but the start of a guide. Something that future sufferers, be they warriors, scribes, dancers, or duck keepers, can use when the ache returns. You call it the mouth's memory. In it, you include more than just treatments. You add footnotes, warnings, anecdotes like never chew root bark and mint at the same time. Your tongue may attempt to retire. Or pain gets louder at night. Soften it with story. And of course, if all else fails, consult the goat. By midnight, you've finished the first page. You roll it gently, Tie it with reed twine and place it in a clay jar beside your bed. Tomorrow, you'll make copies. The day after that, you'll start teaching the children how to copy them, because pain may forget to knock next time, but your people will be ready. They'll have your wall, your scroll, your story, and maybe even a little beer if they're lucky. The next morning, your scroll titled "The Mouth's Memory" has vanished, not stolen, not misplaced, just borrowed, lovingly, by someone with dirt on their hands, respect in their heart, and apparently no concept of lending etiquette. You're annoyed for exactly 1 minute, until a small girl runs up to you in the square, panting. "I read it out loud to my brother," she says, holding her side like the words gave her hiccups. Now his face hurts from laughing. He says the tongue part was too real. You exhale. Okay, maybe it's fine. In fact, maybe it's better this way. Because now your scroll lives outside your jar, bouncing from house to house, being shared, copied, maybe even sung to goats. You really wouldn't put it past your cousin. Still, you sit down that afternoon and start writing a new version, this time on sturdier papyrus and with a few updates. You include a sketch of the mouth with arrows pointing to zones of questionable behavior. You also add a tiny recipe in the margin titled "Beer for Beginners," with a stern warning that says, "Do not taste until third moonrise. No exceptions." Looking at you, Hekar. As you're finishing up, you notice something. Someone's carved a new message into the wall. It reads, "Healed my tooth with warmth and laughter. Forgot the pain. Remembered the goat." You smile. Later that day, an old woman approaches you with something wrapped in cloth. She's one of the few villagers who never speaks unless it's harvest season, or someone's stealing her lentils. So when she speaks now, you lean in like she's revealing a kingdom's secret. She unwraps the cloth and reveals a small wooden box, beautifully carved with tiny spirals. "This," she says, "is from my mother's mother. Used to hold tongue scrapers and mint. Now it holds your words." You gently lift the lid. Inside, folded carefully, is a hand-copied version of your scroll. The ink is slightly smudged, the lines charmingly crooked, but it's there, preserved. "Loved. Thank you," you whisper. "Don't thank me," she replies. "Just keep writing." That evening, you take a walk, not far, just beyond the village edge, where the land softens into dry brush and the wind smells like the past. You find a spot by the riverbank where the reeds make soft music, and you sit with your thoughts. You remember the pain, but more than that, you remember what it taught you, that healing isn't always about medicine. Sometimes it's about being seen. Sometimes it's about making someone laugh while their face feels like it's being pinched by the gods. Sometimes it's about a goat that refuses to mind its own business and ends up becoming legend. You wonder if other villagers have their own versions of this story, their own strange remedies, sacred beer, temple scrolls, and archive huts. Maybe somewhere, someone is healing right now, with their own method, their own prayer, their own stubborn smile. And maybe, just maybe, they'll carve it on a wall someday too. The stars come out slow and shy, like dancers waiting for the drum. You lie back in the dust, close your eyes, and hum softly, an old healing chant you once heard as a child. It doesn't promise miracles, just comfort. And that, you've learned, is more than enough. Tomorrow, you'll start teaching. There are already a few eager students, kids mostly, with chalk-stained fingers and boundless questions. Your cousin insists on being a guest lecturer, despite having questionable credentials and a tendency to use goats as visual aids. Still, the idea of passing this on, of building something beyond the scrolls and beer jars, makes your chest feel warm and just a little bit scared, which means probably it's the right thing to do. Back at home, your grandmother is humming. She doesn't say anything, just slides a bowl of tamarind stew toward you and nods at your new scroll. "I liked the old version better," she mutters. "Less rambling," you grin. "I'm saving the rambling for volume 2. The day your first student carves their own message into the wall, you feel something shift, like history just tilted a little in your direction. It's a boy, barely old enough to keep his sandals tied. His hands are too small for the carving stick, and his letters wobble like baby goats on uneven ground. But when he steps back, proud and breathless, you read his work aloud. Tooth hurt, drank bitter tree drink, cried, hugged my mum, better now, still scared. You clap, of course, because this raw, honest, tiny confession is exactly what the wall was meant for. No dramatic flair, no holy symbols, no scribe-perfect scrolls, just truth, carved in the language of pain and healing that every human understands. The boy beams, then immediately asks if that means he gets to be the new tooth keeper. You tell him it's more of a spiritual title. He tells you he's already printing it on his sandals. The wall begins to grow. Each day brings new stories, carved carefully between the cracks, under the curves, and beside the goat prints. Because of course, the goat has claimed a section too. Some are long, some are so short they feel like poetry. Ate too fast, tooth snapped. Learned patience. Brewed beer wrong, cured tooth, cursed belly. Worth it. No pain, just scared it might come. Watching wall helps. That last one sticks with you. You hadn't considered it, that simply seeing healing laid bare might help someone who hasn't even been hurt yet. But now, it makes perfect sense. People don't just fear the pain, they fear being alone in it. The wall somehow says, you're not. You start organizing the stories by theme, using tiny symbols at the top corner of each carving, a spiral for wisdom, a wave for recurring pain, a tiny fish for unexpected cures, and a miniature goat for, well, goat-related mischief. People laugh when they see the icons, but they also nod. It helps. Soon you're running weekly gatherings by the wall. Nothing formal, just a shared meal, a few scroll readings, and space for anyone who wants to tell their story aloud. One night, a man named Passer, quiet, wiry, and known mostly for selling river pebbles shaped like animals, steps up. He's holding a carved turtle in one hand and a flask of water in the other. My mother, he begins, believed the tongue stores memory. Everyone quiets. When I got my first toothache, she made me chew riverweed while naming everything I loved. She said it would remind my mouth of joy, and joy would convince the pain to leave. You don't interrupt, even when someone giggles. She was wrong, he adds softly. It didn't work, but I remembered everything I loved, and that helped. You add a new icon to the wall after that, a star with a line through it. You call it lessons that weren't cures, but mattered anyway. One afternoon, as you're teaching a group of children how to make ink from soot and acacia sap, Nala appears. She's carrying your original scroll, the first one, the one that vanished weeks ago. She hands it to you with no explanation, only a knowing look. Inside, the scroll has been copied, not just once, but a dozen times. Slight changes here and there. Some verses turned into lullabies, one copy written entirely in rhymes. They passed it around, she says. It lived. You blink at her. You knew. She shrugs. What do you think scribes do all day? The thought of your words traveling like whispers through the night, changing gently with each new mouth, feels oddly perfect. You don't need to control the story. You just need to let it breathe. You ask Nala to add an official copy to her archive. She refuses. Instead, she points to your wall. This is the archive, she says. More honest than any temple scroll. Less dust, too. You nod. Later, as the sun dips low and bathes the village in amber, your cousin sits beside you. He's got another scroll idea. This one's titled Tooth Trials, The Chewer's Guide to Survival. It's written in bright blue ink and includes an illustrated ranking of foods most likely to betray you. Dried dates, cold fish bones, the mysterious green root your aunt swears by, bread made by the neighbor with anger issues, all. Pebbles, on principle you shake your head, but deep down, you know it'll be a hit. Because healing isn't just about facts. It's about laughter too, And the more the village learns to laugh at pain, even the old, lingering kinds, the more powerful your little wall becomes. By now, people have started bringing visitors, traders, relatives, curious passers-by. Some come with stories, some come with silence, but they all come with hope. And hope, you've discovered, carves deeper than pain ever could. You wake to the sound of distant singing, not the usual temple chants or work songs drifting from the riverbanks, but something different, playful, off-key, filled with giggles. You sit up, rubbing your eyes, and step outside into the sun-streaked morning. Children. They've turned your wall into a game. A group of them, barefoot, dust-covered, bright-eyed, are gathered around the lower carvings, reciting them like riddles. One child calls out, "Bit a stone," cried alone, "better by dawn. Who wrote it?" And the others scramble, pointing, laughing, trying to be first. The wall, your healer's wall, has become more than history. It's become memory in motion. You should be annoyed. They're smudging some of the newer carvings with their palms. One of them even tried to improve a sentence with charcoal hearts. But you can't help smiling. This is exactly what the wall was meant to do. Breathe, evolve, endure. Today, you're not teaching. You're traveling. Not far. Just over the ridge to the village of Bennu, where they've invited you to consult on a tooth issue. That's what the runner said. A tooth issue. Vague and ominous. Like something that might involve a lion or an angry spirit. You pack your satchel with care. A copy of the mouth's memory, your carved stick. A flask of weak root beer, for demonstrating only you're not about to dose someone else's villagers without consent. And a handful of spiral tokens. The walk is quiet. Just you, the road, and the occasional flutter of birds startled from fig trees. Halfway there, you pass a shrine to Hathor, the goddess of joy and women's health. You pause, bow slightly, and whisper, "I'm doing my best. Try not to let me embarrass us." When you arrive, the village of Bennu is not in chaos, as you'd feared. It's just confused. The patient is an elder named Tunki. She's wise, respected, and reportedly hasn't spoken a word in 3 days, not due to pain, but protest. She's insulted by the pain, a neighbour explains. Says it's beneath her. You find her lying under a fig tree, arms crossed, lips pursed, as if daring the ache to do its worst. "Tunki?" you ask. She squints at you. "You're the child with the wall. I'm an adult. You look like a child. This is going great." Still, you kneel beside her and ask the right questions. When did it start? What does it feel like? What has she tried? What helps? She answers with grunts, shrugs, and, once, a long sigh that sounds like she's reliving every bad meal she's ever had. Eventually, she softens. "It started after I chewed dried cassava from my niece's kitchen." She soaks it in vinegar like she's angry at it. You examine her mouth carefully. Swelling. Redness. A suspicious molar that looks more like a warning sign than a tooth. You could recommend an extraction, but she's not the "let someone yank part of me out" type. So instead, you offer her your root beer formula. She sniffs it. Smells like bark and betrayal. It'll help. She drinks it. Gags once. Glares. But later that afternoon, she's humming a lullaby to herself. That evening, the villagers gather around their own little wall, smaller than yours, barely a line of smoothed stones. But it's a beginning. They ask you to speak. You tell them about the goat, about Hekar's mix-up, about crying so hard your eyes ached worse than your gums, and then you hand out carving sticks. By moonrise, the Bennu wall has its first 5 stories. Cried, drank, spat, healed, burned tongue. Still counts. If you read this, smile. That helps too. You head back home the next morning, tired but filled with a warmth no sun could match. When you crest the ridge and see your own village below, you pause. From here, the wall looks like a line of songs etched into the earth. When you return, your grandmother is waiting. "How was the expedition?" she asks, in a tone that suggests she expected you to return covered in sap and failure. They carved their own stories, you say. She hands you a bowl of lentils. Good, now fix the fence. The goat thinks she owns the yard. You do. Then you sit by your wall as the sun dips again. More stories have been added. You read them slowly, like bedtime verses. Ate too many figs. Don't regret it. Bit. My tongue lying. Deserved it. Pain came. So did kindness. You run your fingers over the words. Some are fading already. Others are fresh, bold, refusing to be ignored. You'll need to teach the children how to maintain the wall, how to touch up the carvings, keep the edges clear, even shield them from rain. You start drawing up a list of lessons in your scroll, not just on teeth, but on memory, on caretaking, on what it means to let pain become a path instead of a prison. You think of Tunki, still insulting her molar under the fig tree. You think of the boy with his toothkeeper sandals. You think of the goat, who, just this once, hasn't done anything wrong. And you smile, because even though your own ache is long gone, you've come to realize something important. The healing never ends, but neither does the story. A week passes, maybe two. You lose track of the days, not because you're lazy, but because the wall has taken over everything. Your mornings, your thoughts, your dreams. You wake up thinking about sentence rhythms. You fall asleep trying to remember whether you used the goat symbol too many times. You have, but you don't regret it. And now, for the first time, someone has copied your entire wall. Not just parts of it, the whole thing, word for word, carving for carving. You find out when a traveller arrives from the east with a scroll wrapped in blue thread. He says it's a gift, but the way he presents it, like a sacred offering, you'd think it was an artifact dug from the Nile. You unroll the scroll slowly. The ink is fresh, the reed fibers still stiff. But there it is, your words, your wall, recreated with startling precision, even the messy ones, even the joke about biting your own tongue when lying. It's all there. You're quiet for a long time. The traveller fidgets. We thought you should know. It's being studied. By scribes in the capital. You finally speak. Studied? Yes. They're calling it an ethnographic archive of grassroots health narratives. You blink, then snort. Sounds exhausting. He laughs. It probably is. But they're also building their own wall. You nod. Then ask, did they get the goat part right? He grins. Every single hoofprint. After he leaves, you sit beside the wall and stare at it for a long time. The late afternoon sun hits the clay just right, casting soft shadows in the grooves of each carving. You realize something. This isn't just a healer's wall anymore. It's a map of pain, of survival, of joy, of missteps and root beer, and nighttime prayers whispered into fig leaves. It's also a mirror, because somewhere between all the stories and symbols, you began to see yourself differently, not as a patient, not even just as a scribe, but as someone who listens for a living. And now, people seek you out, not just for cures, but for counsel, for comfort, for the strange magic of being heard, like the boy who shows up one afternoon, with a swollen cheek and a lopsided drawing of a molar on his tunic. He doesn't say much, just points at his jaw and shrugs like, yeah, this again. You sit him down, offer a mild rinse, listen as he tells you about the date his sister dared him to chew. Spoiler, it had a stone. But more importantly, you listen to the silence between his words. The part that says, I was scared to come, but I knew this was safe. And when he leaves, you give him a carved token shaped like a smile. Bury it, you tell him, under a tree. Why? It makes the tree grow crooked, like your pain, but strong. He grins. Pain still there, but lighter. Later that night, your cousin shows up with an announcement. He wants to expand the brand. You blink. We have a brand? Of course we do, he says, gesturing like a street performer. The wall, the scrolls, the goat. It's iconic, you sigh. Please don't sell t-shirts. He already has a sample drawn. It shows the goat standing heroically on a pile of scrolls with the words, "Fermented but fierce," below. You almost say no, but then you laugh so hard your side hurts, and he beams like he's won a prize. The next morning, you catch him trying to convince the brewer to sponsor tooth-strengthening ale. You pretend not to see. Instead, you meet with your apprentice. Yes, you have an apprentice now, a girl named Luma, who asked if she could shadow your thoughts. You told her she could start with your shadow. She's sharp, gentle, always asking if a pain is angry or just lonely. You've never heard it put that way, but it makes perfect sense. You give her the task of carving a new story into the wall, one from the Benue village. It's her first. She's nervous. You remind her, the goal isn't to be perfect, it's to be honest. She carves slowly, carefully. The letters tremble a little, like they're still deciding if they belong. They do. That evening, someone leaves a jar by the wall. It's sealed with wax, labelled simply, "For the next ache." Inside is a collection of dried herbs, a strip of linen, and a small carving stick wrapped in goat fur. You don't know who left it, but you know why. Because the wall is no longer yours. It never really was. It belongs to the ones who ache. To the ones who laugh while they heal. To the ones who whisper to the goat when no one's looking. And to the ones who see pain not as a shameful secret, but as a story waiting to be told. You've started keeping a nighttime log. Nothing fancy, just short lines etched into a flat stone beside your sleeping mat. Not about pain or treatments or wall stories. This one's just for dreams. Last night's dream. You were floating down the Nile in a beer jar, using a toothbrush as an oar. You passed by temples where scribes waved scrolls like fans and a crocodile offered you mint. You jot it down. Luma sees it the next morning. She reads it, then stares at you like you're hiding extra sleep behind your eyes. This needs to go on the wall. It's not historical. She points to the section about biting a cursed date twice. Fair enough. This new rhythm, this flow between your daily work and your inner wanderings, feels more balanced than anything you've known before. You're still helping others, still mixing herbal brews and listening to stories, but you're also noticing things that once escaped you, like the way people touch the wall before speaking, as if asking permission, or the soft murmur, some whisper under their breath, a phrase that translates roughly to, "May my story find a match." Even the goat seems different lately, less chaotic, more ceremonial. It might just be wishful thinking, but yesterday, she stood beside a grieving woman for a full hour, quietly chewing grass and offering zero mischief. When the woman finally smiled, she patted the goat's head and left a token at the wall. You carve a new symbol, a heart with horns, not for healing, for unexpected comfort. Then something changes. You get visitors, not just neighbors, outsiders, scribes from the capital, scholars from desert temples, even a skeptical merchant from the coast who claims toothaches are a myth invented by bread sellers. They come to see the wall, to study the oral history of oral history, as one scribe puts it. You let them, cautiously. Some take notes, others just stare. A few try to correct grammar on certain carvings. Those ones you gently steer away from the kids' section. But most of them listen, really listen. And when they leave gifts. One brings a set of chimes made from old molar-shaped stones. Another donates a carved stool with tooth symbols etched into the legs. One particularly intense scholar presents you with a scroll titled "Incisors of the Empire," an analysis, and asks if she can use your goat on the cover. You allow it. She cries. The wall grows again, not wider, deeper. People start leaving, not just stories, but questions. Why do we feel pain in the mouth more than in the heart? Is fear the ache before the ache? Can a joke be medicine? You don't answer, not directly. But you do add a new section to the wall, a curved corner now called the soft ache. It's for questions, reflections, quiet things. The section fills fast. You're sketching a new scroll, your most ambitious yet. It's titled The Teeth of Time, a meditation on how every culture has its own way of remembering pain. You include stories from your village, of course, but also from others. How the desert people chew bark laced with salt. How the river nomads use fish bones to trace pain maps on skin. How the highland folk tell jokes in rhyme to soothe the ache. Luma helps you compile it. She's better at organizing than you are, less distracted by poetic metaphors, more focused on making sure the scroll can actually be read without a side commentary. You finish it just as the rainy season starts. Rain here is brief but intense. Like the sky suddenly remembers it has somewhere to be and cries it out all at once. The wall, though protected, still gets splashed. So you and the children make covers, not just tarps, stories. They paint cloth sheets with symbols and phrases, then stretch them above the wall like banners. Each one tells a small tale. One says, pain doesn't last, but stories do, especially funny ones. During one stormy evening, a bolt of lightning strikes the far fig tree. The village gathers the next morning, inspecting the damage. Thankfully, no one's hurt. But the tree, the one Tunky liked, is split down the center. Inside the crack, nestled like a secret, is a carving none of you made. When the mouth closes, the soul must speak. It's old, very old, so old, even Nala can't date it precisely. Older than this village, she whispers. Maybe even older than the language. You all stare in silence. Then, naturally, your cousin says, we should name the tree. He suggests Toothy. You veto it. Eventually, you settle on First Voice. You carve the name gently into the bark, along with a new spiral icon, this one ringed with jagged lines to signify discovery. More rain, more stories, and a growing sense that you're no longer telling a tale about healing, you're living one. It starts with a riddle. A little girl, barely 5, maybe 6, with wild hair and even wilder questions, approaches your wall one morning, stares at a carving, then turns to you and asks, if a tooth falls but no one feels it, was it ever part of your smile? You blink. Slowly, then respond, I'm going to need coffee before answering that. You don't even drink coffee. But the question stays with you. That same week, Luma notices something odd. A pattern in the carvings. Not a code exactly, but a rhythm. A beat. She points it out late one afternoon, dragging you to the section, with the earliest writings. Every 7th carving talks about loss, she says. You frown. Like emotional loss. Not always. Sometimes it's just food. She's right. The 7th carving talks about losing a date pit mid-bite. The 14th, about losing a tooth on the eve of a wedding. The 21st, a brother lost. To River Fever, who once taught the storyteller how to chew cane. It continues. Every 7th. Coincidence? Maybe. But it feels like the wall has started telling its own story beneath the stories. A soft echo. One only the careful hear. You mark the pattern discreetly, with tiny dots no bigger than sesame seeds. A scholar visiting from the West notices and asks if it's some sort of numerical healing code. You shrug. Probably just the wall's way of mourning. She doesn't get it, but she writes it down anyway. That night, you sit by the fire and reread your old scrolls. Some hold up well. Others feel clumsy now, like wearing someone else's teeth. But one entry stands out. Healing is not the opposite of hurting. It's the echo. You remember writing that after your worst ache, the one no beer or bark could touch, the one you carried not in your gums but behind your ribs. You add it to the wall, carefully, in your own handwriting. The next morning, someone adds underneath. Then echo loudly. I'm still listening. You don't know who wrote it, but your eyes sting a little. More visitors arrive, this time from the far south. Their healer carries a satchel of dried moss, coloured shells, and what looks suspiciously like a wooden spoon carved into a tooth shape. He asks to trade. You offer him your scroll, the teeth of time. He gives you a bundle labeled laughter dust. It's not magical, just crushed mint, dried honey bark, and a whisper of pepper. When mixed into warm water, it makes people smile. Not because it heals, because it reminds them of feasts. You use it the next time a child is afraid. She giggles, mid-sip, and forgets she was supposed to be crying. You record that. The wall gets its first food recipe, then another. Suddenly, the lower corner becomes a culinary clinic. Recipes once used to bribe teeth into calmness. Spiced porridge with cooling herbs, fig stew with crushed clove seeds, even something called mushy good idea bread, which is less of a bread and more of an edible pillow. Someone adds illustrations. Bad, buns, but joyful. You carve a new symbol for this, a steaming bowl with 2 teeth smiling inside. Luma calls it bite-friendly cuisine, and now the wall has 3 languages: pain, memory, and nourishment. Then, on a foggy morning, an elder named Babu adds something no one expects. His carving reads, "I faked a toothache once, just to be held." It stops you, not just because of what it says, but because of how many people nod silently when they read it. You don't erase it. You don't correct it. You honor it by carving your own truth beside it. Sometimes the ache is the only honest thing left. Someone else adds, "If it gets me soup, let it hurt a bit longer." Humor and honesty, braided like roots. You realize the wall isn't just a healer's tool now. It's a confessional, a chorus, a low hum of human messiness, aching, reaching, laughing anyway. Your cousin, who still insists on calling himself Chief Wall Curator, builds a bench beside it. Not just for sitting, but for waiting. People need space, he says. Before they speak, he's not wrong. That week, someone carves a song into the clay. Not lyrics, actual musical notations using tooth symbols. A traveling musician arrives days later, strums it on a stringed gourd, and the wall listens to itself for the first time. And maybe it's just the sunset messing with your eyes, but you swear it glows. A little. Luma records the performance. The goat chews the recording scroll. Balance restored. And you just sit quietly that evening, arms around your knees, smiling like you've bitten into something soft, warm, and unexpectedly familiar. Not sweet, but healing. The wall now murmurs at night. Not literally, you're not hallucinating, but the way it holds heat from the day, how the breeze drags over its carvings, and the soft, uneven breaths of those sleeping nearby. It's almost musical, like a lullaby, hummed by the past to the present. You sleep closer to it now, not because of duty, but comfort. The wall isn't just a healer's journal anymore. It's become the village's memory foam. A record of aches, yes, but also of strange triumphs, of guilty snacks, and of people who dared to say, "Hey, this hurts," and weren't shamed for it. Tonight, under a lavender moon and the distant giggle of fig bats, a new carving appears. You didn't make it. Luma didn't. Your cousin certainly didn't. He's too busy trying to convince the potter to make molar-shaped mugs. It's a child's work. The letters uneven, too close together. But the story, clear. My mum said my ache wasn't real. I told her to ask the wall. It stuns you. Not because it's sad, though it is, but because it's brave. And because a few spaces down someone, an adult, has replied. I asked. The wall said yes. The next morning, you find offerings beside the reply. Not medicines, but little kindnesses. A flat stone painted with a sunflower, a wooden spoon with sweet carved into the handle, and a tiny bag of dried mango slices. You add your own, a token shaped like a flame. Not fire, warmth, and you begin to wonder. Maybe this wall, born out of your personal misery and fermented bark, has become something else entirely. Not just a record, a witness. It's seen people at their weakest, their silliest, their most tender. It's watched toothaches morph into grief, into hope, into oddly specific stew recipes, and it holds all of it without judgment. One afternoon, an older woman visits. She's new to the village, with a gait like someone who's been negotiating with her knees for the past 20 years. She doesn't ask for help, just sits beside the wall, stares. You sit with her. Silence stretches comfortably between you like a shared blanket. Finally, she whispers, "I had a son once. He hated brushing. Said it made his gums cry. You wait. He's gone now. But I still hear him every time I smell mint." She opens her hand to reveal a worn wooden toothbrush, the bristles long gone, the handle chewed. She places it at the base of the wall and walks away. You add nothing. Sometimes silence is the truest carving. The days stretch warm and long. The dry season creeps in gently, like an old friend with sand in his shoes. The kids invent a new game. They call it Toothaches. The rules are unclear, but it involves racing, shouting random dental facts, and trying to convince the goat to wear a carved molar around her neck. She does, briefly, then eats it. Balance restored. Luma, now more confident, suggests creating an index of pain types. Not clinical, emotional. You're skeptical until she shows you her draft. Type A, ache of regret, usually involves old stew or old love. Type B, ache of laughter. Side effects include sore cheeks and better sleep. Type C, ache of not being believed. Type D, ache of believing. Too much, you add one more. Type E, ache that doesn't know its name. You carve them discreetly, off to the side, like a secret menu. More people start to visit at night, not for healing, just to be near it. Some sit in silence, others whisper stories as if feeding the wall small pieces of themselves to keep it warm. One couple even gets engaged in front of it. They're carving, from ache to oaths. Your cousin makes a commemorative mug. The wall is no longer a healer's tool. It's a communal hearth. One night, under a clear sky littered with stars, you sit beside it, watching shadows crawl slowly over the lower carvings. The goat snores in the distance. A child nearby hums a nonsense tune in their sleep. And you feel it, not as a healer, not as a storyteller, but as a person who once cried over fermented beer and a broken molar. This wall is no longer just about toothaches. It's about the quiet truth that all of us hurt. That pain, though deeply personal, is never truly unique, and that sharing it, however messily, however humorously, is the first step to healing. You lie back, close your eyes, and for once, your sleep is dreamless. Not because there's nothing to imagine, but because, for now, everything feels complete. You wake up to the sound of laughter. Not just one person, a cluster of giggles, the kind that builds like a wave and crashes softly against the walls of your home. You stretch, blink the sleep from your eyes, and realize the sun hasn't even reached the fig tree yet. This is early laughter, sacred stuff. You wander out, still groggy, and there they are. 5 children and your cousin, mid-rehearsal for what he insists is the world's first toothache play. He sees you and bows dramatically. "Behold, the healer awakens," one of the kids whispers. "That's your cue," and another one hands you a fake molar on a stick. You groan, but you smile. The play is absurd, half storytelling, half interpretive. Dance, with sound effects provided by the goat wearing a drum tied to her tail. But it works. They've turned your wall into a stage, each carving becoming a scene, each symbol a character. The story follows a brave boy named Acheko, who journeys across the desert to find the legendary Tooth of Truth, which can only be seen when someone admits they're scared. The twist? The Tooth of Truth is not a tooth at all. It's a mirror. You pretend to be annoyed when they rope you into the final act, but you secretly love it. You play the old tooth spirit, who gives Acheko a magical clove and a speech about how sometimes the only cure is time. You ad-lib your lines. The kids love it. The wall watches silently, its symbols now smiling under the soft gold of morning light. After, the applause dies down, and the goat chews a corner of the makeshift curtain. You sit quietly at the base of the wall, and it hits you. This wasn't just fun. This was sacred. Not in the incense-burning, chant-singing way, but in the bone-deep way that makes you remember. Healing is performance too. Storytelling. Laughter in the face of fear. A child pretending to limp just so someone will carry them. A cousin who believes the goat is ready for acting school. Later, Luma brings you a new carving. It's small, clean. Joy is also medicine. Apply generously. You place it near the bottom row, where little hands can touch it easily. Soon, a new rhythm begins to take shape. Mornings are for treatment. Herbal rinses, poultices, kind questions, the occasional lecture about chewing too many date stones. But afternoons are for art. Children choreograph dances based on molar shapes. Teenagers paint scenes from their favorite carvings. A quiet boy starts writing lullabies inspired by the scrolls. And one afternoon, a visitor arrives with a gift. She's from a far-off desert town where the wind shapes the dunes into perfect waves. She carries a musical instrument shaped like a jawbone. When she plucks its strings, the sound isn't like any you've heard. It's more like a sigh wrapped in birdsong. She plays beside the wall at dusk. The village gathers silently, listening. Even the goat stops chewing. When she finishes, she carves just 3 words. Ache meets air. You thank her. She says nothing, just nods, and walks back into the sand, her footprints vanishing behind her, as if the ground itself wants to remember her passage. That night, no one speaks. Even your cousin resists the urge to name her Lady, Sigh Strings. The next day, you find a group of elders sitting by the wall. They're passing around a carved token, round, smooth, with a tiny crack running through it like a scar. They explain it's from a time long ago, a drought, a migration, a birth under an eclipse. They don't agree on the details. Historians still argue whether the crackstone tokens were used for ceremonies or storytelling games. But here, today, it becomes something new, a memory stone. Each person who holds it shares a story not about pain, but about healing. Not the dramatic kind, just the slow, quiet sort. An unexpected hug, a forgotten joke remembered at the right time, the way someone once said their name like it mattered. You carve those stories too, and a new section is born. The reminders. It's symbol? A circle with a scar. Your apprentice, Luma, suggests turning the wall into a map. Not geographically, emotionally. We could chart it, she says, from ache to acceptance, from fear to laughter, like a path. You pause and then nod. You begin that night. You mark the carvings that led to breakthroughs, where someone shifted from suffering to strength. You connect those with lines, arcs, and branches. Not every story follows a straight path. Some loop back, some end abruptly, some merge with others. It becomes the map of healing. Visitors spend hours tracing it with their fingers. Some add footnotes. One person adds a joke every time a story turns hopeful. The goat adds drool. Consistently. One evening, you hear a grandmother whisper to her granddaughter, "See this path? It's like yours, wobbly but strong." And suddenly, all those random carvings, those silly wall doodles, as your cousin once called them, become sacred ground. This isn't just bedtime history, it's bedtime hope, the kind that says, yes, you'll ache, but you'll also laugh. And someday, maybe even carve your own story into something that lasts longer than pain.